Members, the next item of business is a motion on support for deaf children. Clerk, please read the motion.
This Assembly recognises the negative impact that the lack of specialist teachers of the deaf and other essential specialist educational support professionals has had on deaf children and their families, and calls on the Minister of Education to bring forward plans to ensure that every deaf child and their family has access to a qualified teacher of the deaf and other specialist support staff as early as possible, regardless of their level of deafness.
Thank you. And I call Robbie Butler to move the motion.
So moved, Mr Deputy Speaker.
Thank you. The Business Committee has agreed to allow up to 1 hour 30 minutes for this debate. The proposer of the motion will have 10 minutes to propose and up to 10 minutes to wind. All other speakers will have up to 5 minutes. Please open the debate on the motion. Mr Butler.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and thank the Minister for attending on this important motion today, because access to quality education is indeed a fundamental right for every child, regardless of their abilities or their circumstances. For children who are deaf or hard of hearing, their educational journey can be filled with unnecessary challenges if early intervention and specialised support are not indeed provided. This is especially true in Northern Ireland, where we have a Fair Start, which emphasises in the removing of barriers to education from the very earliest stages. To ensure that deaf children are given a fair and equal opportunity to succeed, it is crucial to invest in more teachers of the deaf, ensuring their availability to every child regardless of their degree of hearing loss. Mr Deputy Speaker, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child guarantees the right of every child to an education that maximises their potential. Articles 28 and 29 of the UNCRC emphasise the right to education and the development of the child's personality, talents and abilities to their fullest potential. Deaf children, like all children, have the right to an inclusive and equitable education that meets their unique needs. Without adequate support from teachers of the deaf, this right is indeed compromised. Additionally, Article 23 of the UNCRC specifically highlights the right of children with disabilities, stating that they should enjoy a full and decent life in conditions that promote dignity, self-reliance and active participation in the community. Therefore, ensuring that more teachers of the deaf are available would honour these commitments by providing the early intervention and specialised teaching that deaf children need to overcome communication barriers to thrive both academically and socially. According to the National Deaf Children's Society of Northern Ireland, Northern Ireland is home to around 1,500 deaf children. Supporting these children requires a high level of specialist knowledge and skills, particularly in early years and educational settings where teachers of the deaf play a pivotal role. Teachers of the deaf work with deaf children and their families from the moment a child's hearing loss is identified, often in infancy, through their entire educational journey, including primary and post-primary education. Their role extends beyond the classroom, ensuring that deaf children develop strong communication and language skills that would be essential for academic success. The number of qualified teachers of the deaf in Northern Ireland has declined, Mr Deputy Speaker, by 32% since 2011, with 30% of the current workforce expected to retire within the next decade. And there is a pressing need to future-proof this vital profession. This decline in the workforce creates significant challenges for providing consistent support, especially when schools and services struggle to obtain cover for qualified teachers of the deaf. The shortfall in trained professionals compromise the level of support available for deaf children, risking long-term negative impacts on their education and well-being. Teachers of the deaf are qualified teachers who complete additional postgraduate training in deaf education. However, Northern Ireland currently lacks local training opportunities for prospective teachers of the deaf, forcing trainees to travel for their qualifications. And although the cost of training is covered by the Education Authority Sensory Service, this logistical challenge can deter candidates from pursuing this critical role. Furthermore, many mainstream teachers are unaware of the Teachers of Deaf Children career path. This hinders recruitment efforts. By addressing these barriers and promoting awareness of teachers of the deaf profession, Northern Ireland can encourage more educators to specialise in deaf education. In addition, Mr Deputy Speaker, to teachers of the deaf, there is also a need to create specialist roles, such as communication support workers or specialist classroom assistants, who could then further support deaf children. These professionals could ensure that assistive technology is properly utilised in classrooms, thereby enhancing deaf students' access to the curriculum and their overall learning experience. Therefore, by expanding the range of specialist roles, Northern Ireland's education system can better meet the diverse needs of deaf students. I think it's pretty much well established, certainly in my time on the Education Committee, that like classroom assistants and teachers of the deaf play a unique and indispensable role by collaborating with a wide range of health and social care professionals to ensure that deaf children receive tailored early support. And this early intervention is crucial for improving outcomes, as delays in addressing hearing loss can result in significant developmental setbacks. Research shows that deaf children in Northern Ireland are significantly more likely than their hearing peers to experience psychological disorders, particularly anxiety. Factors such as communication barriers, social isolation, and a lack of deaf awareness contribute to these challenges. Early intervention by teachers of the deaf and other specialists can mitigate these risks, therefore promoting better long-term mental health and social outcomes for deaf children. Mr Deputy Speaker, the absence of timely intervention not only affects a child's language and communication development, but also their overall well-being and academic achievement. And as the National Deaf Children's Society points out, early access to teachers of the deaf can prevent these challenges from escalating, ensuring that deaf children are able to fully participate in educational and social life. The decline in the number of teachers of the deaf and the anticipated retirements within the next decade present a significant threat to the future support available for deaf children. Investing in more teachers of the deaf is not just a matter of ensuring educational equity, it's a long-term investment in the future of Northern Ireland's society and economy. Children who receive the right support from an early age are more likely to succeed academically, enter higher education or the workforce, and become active, contributing members of our society. And on that point, as the chairperson of the Disability APG, I'm becoming more and more acutely aware of the regrettable stats we have in Northern Ireland for employment of people with a disability from the full range of disabilities, and this also impacts people who are deaf. Conversely, children who do not receive adequate support may face barriers to employment, social exclusion, and, as I've alluded to, mental health challenges later in life. Therefore, by future-proofing the teachers of the deaf workforce and ensuring that every deaf child and their family has timely access to specialist professionals, Northern Ireland can create an education system that promotes inclusion, equity and excellence. This approach aligns with the principles of A Fair Start, which emphasises the importance of removing barriers to learning and providing every child with the opportunity to fulfil their potential. Mr Deputy Speaker, in conclusion, the need for a robust and sustainable sensory service and specialist workforce is urgent and critical, thus mirroring the same need for more teachers of the deaf. Without adequate support, deaf children in Northern Ireland face unnecessary challenges in their education, social development and mental health. So, in line with the UNCRC and A Fair Start, it's imperative that we invest in future-proofing the teachers of the deaf workforce and expanding specialist roles, thus ensuring early intervention for all deaf children. And only by taking these steps can we ensure that every deaf child has the opportunity to succeed and thrive, therefore fulfilling their potential and contributing to a more inclusive, accessible society. Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker.
Danny Baker.
And I thank the member for bringing forward this motion, which we'll be supporting, and for articulating the barriers so well, so thank you. Accordia, Sinn Féin wants an education system underpinned by equality, which delivers for all and leaves no child or young person behind. Deaf children and young people should perform just as well as their peers, and they should know while deafness presents challenges, it does not have to prevent them from living the life they want to lead. Right now, this is not happening. Better support will allow these children to thrive, however services are under-resourced. Most deaf children attend mainstream schools, where there is a good chance that they will be the only deaf child. Deaf children and young people have varying types and levels of deafness. This presents a challenge for educationalists working with deaf children and for their families, who need as much information as possible as early as possible. Some deaf children use sign language and some lip read. Others will use hearing aids or implants. However, their ability to hear will never be the same as the child who doesn't need support with hearing. The Education Authority's Sensory Service does work with children and young people with sensory impairment, from the time of their diagnosis through all stages of their education. However, the level and availability of the support is not where it should be. Unfortunately, deaf children and young people have no guarantee that their teachers or classroom assistants can communicate with them in their first language. Provision is spread thinly and in some cases decreasing, despite an increase in the numbers of deaf children. It is a fact that there is not enough support for children and young people who want to be educated through the medium of sign language. Going forward, the Minister for Education must focus on closing the attainment gap experienced by deaf children and young people, particularly at GCSE level. Deaf children's attainment at school should be the same as the general population, but this is far from the case. Having GCSEs in English and mathematics is essential to accessing the North's labour market. As a result, the current attainment gap means that deaf people, young people, are being disadvantaged in education and employment. Once a deaf young person progresses beyond GCSEs, the attainment gap tends to close. For example, deaf young people often do well at university because they have developed the coping strategies and they are able to deal with their environment. The best educational outcomes for deaf children and young people will be accomplished via consistent and more effective early intervention. Early intervention is crucial if young minds are to develop communication skills and acquire language, including sign, to enable them to compete effectively with their hearing peers. They also must be given the right support within the school environment, and teaching staff must be given the right training and resources to achieve this. I would encourage the Minister of Education and his department to focus on achieving the best possible outcome for deaf children and young people, and to ensure that they are provided with every opportunity to succeed. Our schools must be fully prepared and understand the needs of children and young people in the classrooms. Children and young people with hearing impairments and deafness should no longer be sidelined.
David Brooks.
Mr Deputy Speaker, and my thanks to the member for bringing the motion today. All of us speaking to this motion today will share a common aim that deaf children and young people are appropriately provided for within our education system in a way that allows them to flourish and in the same way that we wish for all of our children, but understanding that those who have additional support needs must have them fulfilled in order to reach their full potential. While many aspects of this specific element of our education system is relatively new to me and has required research and learning to speak to it today, the principle is similar to the ambition we have and share across party divides for those with other special educational and support needs. And learning that I know I will seek to build upon beyond this. Oh, sorry, I think I've got something there. There are over 1,400 deaf children and young people in Northern Ireland, and a significant majority of those are attending mainstream schools. But there is, of course, specialist provision in a number of locations, and I'm particularly aware that one of the schools that provide that provision is Craigie Primary School in my own constituency, and indeed my old council area, a school that is well loved, highly thought of within its own community of Craigie. The Consortium for Research on Deaf Education in Northern Ireland report noted that there was a vacancy rate of around 3% for TOD posts, but seems to have also raised concerns about falling numbers, noting a 7% fall in TODs and employment since 2011. We will all, none more than the Minister, share a common wish to ensure that teaching provision is maintained at an appropriate level. There did appear promising progress too, though. The report notes on the age profile of TODs that 23% were over the age of 50, which is a significant drop from 2021, when the same question suggested that the number was much more unsustainable at 40%. Though it does seem appropriate that we should note that the report itself draws attention to the fact that some of the data considered should be viewed with caution due to the inconsistencies in response rates and questions answered in surveys over the years, which makes valid comparison difficult to draw conclusions from, particularly for surveys taken prior to 2019. That does not detract from the many useful issues raised by the report, which can only use what data is available, which is a point for reflection in and of itself, and which rightly says it should form, and the report says it should form the basis for discussion and further analysis rather than firm conclusions. On this basis, I look forward to hearing from the Minister, who I hope can give us an up-to-date overview of the current landscape in the sector. We know that deaf children in Northern Ireland are more likely to have additional needs. For example, anxiety is more prevalent, and just as we are looking at ways to address and support the rise of anxiety in other children with no or differing additional needs, so that should apply no less to deaf children and their particular needs, as we look to how we can make their educational experience as smooth and appropriately supported as possible. We do, of course, have a range of interventions already. We know that EA Sensory Service provides support to deaf children and their families from the point a child is recognised as being deaf, whatever their level of deafness. When that support kicks in, it can be subject to a family feeling ready to receive that support, but I understand it often begins within the home during preschool years, but also clearly continues within the classrooms to assist their development with support from qualified teachers of deaf children and young people and educational audiologists. I also note that from the NDCS briefing provided to members in advance of this discussion, that they too are working on their own report on the sensory service, and I'm sure the Education Committee in particular will take the opportunity to look at that when published. As I said at the outset of this contribution, I don't stand here as an expert, but I certainly look forward to taking up the opportunities to engage with those working in this space, and most importantly, those families and individuals with lived experience, to further understand their challenges, opportunities to improve services, and work with them to reduce and remove any barriers they face. I know the same will be true of colleagues across this House, including the Education Minister, who I know is doing all he can to support and improve services for those with special educational needs across the education system within the limited resources that he has been allocated by the Executive to meet ever-growing needs. Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker.
Nick Matheson.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I also rise to support the motion and to thank the member who brought it to the House today. I'd also like to put on record my thanks to Deirdre and the wider team at the National Deaf Children's Society, who campaign tirelessly for the best support for deaf children in Northern Ireland. When deafness is identified in a child, even in infancy, other members have referenced this, they will ordinarily be assigned a teacher of the deaf who will start working with them and their family from that early stage. And I think at the outset I would just like to put on record my thanks and tribute to the work of the EA Sensory Service and those specialist teachers of the deaf who deliver this vital work and intervention at that very early stage. It's a model of support perhaps for all children with SEN that we could learn from. But as has already been referenced, access to that vital support is not without challenge and threat indeed to that service, and other members have referenced the decline in numbers of teachers of the deaf in the region of a 32% decline since 2011, and concerningly, as we look to the future, a potential 30% of those teachers in line to retire within the next decade. So it is clear that there is a need to focus on really meaningful and engaged workforce planning if this service is to continue providing the support that it does for our deaf children. But despite that decline in the workforce and the imminent future challenges, there is no route to qualify as a teacher of the deaf in Northern Ireland, and that has already been referenced. So to generate teachers of the deaf that we need, we're going to either need qualified teachers to travel across the water to GB for the postgraduate qualification, or we need to be incentivising teachers to come to Northern Ireland who already have that qualification. Both these again will require strategic workforce planning by the department, and I would hope that the Minister in his remarks today will maybe outline what work is being specifically undertaken in that regard. There may also be the need to look at the model of support itself and whether, as well as that vital resource of the teachers of the deaf, who are highly valued by children and their families, I think that can't be overstated, the value that is placed on that role. But there are other roles that could be explored in terms of how we deliver support, potentially specialist classroom assistants or communication support workers who could have a real focus on the appropriate use of technology for some of these children. So again, I would like to hear from the Minister if these alternative roles are being actively considered. Depending on the level of deafness, children will see their teacher of the deaf with varying frequency, and for some that may only be an annual visit. So being assigned that specialist teacher is not a passport to regular support, and I think that the need for well-trained teachers and classroom assistants who can utilise technology effectively and who can also roll out whole school approaches to ensure that the needs of a deaf child are met in every aspect of their school life are absolutely essential. We really do need better training, both at initial teacher training stage in terms of CPD and in the upskilling of our classroom assistants. So this training and awareness, it's not just about the technical knowledge that a teacher needs to teach a deaf pupil in their class. And this has already been referenced by other members, but I think it's really important to highlight again. There is a 2023 report carried out by Queen's University Belfast that found that around 20% of deaf children experience at least one psychological disorder, and that's compared to 12% of their hearing peers in the classroom. And anxiety disorders have already been highlighted as being very prevalent. Factors like listening, fatigue, communication barriers, social isolation, they can all potentially exacerbate those challenges. So it is vital, as far as I understand it, that teachers properly understand these additional needs, not just in terms of the barriers to learning because of the deafness, but also because of those additional psychological issues that can arise. So teachers need to be properly trained to reflect the very best practice when they have a deaf child in their class. So the current system of support, I want to be clear, does have the potential and in many cases does provide the right assistance for deaf children in Northern Ireland, but the service is experiencing pressure and it cannot stand still, and I hope that maybe is the message that comes through today. And I want to highlight, along with David Brooks, who had mentioned that research commissioned by the National Deaf Children's Society in partnership with the EA, which will be looking at the current provision of the EA sensory service and what the future of that service might look like. And I hope that the report and that findings will be available soon, and I would strongly urge the Minister to take that on board in terms of considering future interventions by the Department. So we look forward to the publication of that research, and I would really just close that there can be no complacency in the service that's provided to meet the needs of deaf children. Longer term planning is vital to support our deaf learners in Northern Ireland, and I confirm I support the motion and hope that it will receive support across the House today.
Sinead McLaughlin.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I too thank the member for bringing forward this motion. Everyone in this House will recognise both the immense importance of schooling as well as the challenges that these years can bring. Yet for those born deaf or hearing impaired, these challenges are considerably greater, whilst the importance of school is no less. It is estimated, as others have said, that in Northern Ireland there are around 1,400 children who are deaf. Being born into a world deprived of hearing is a challenge that most of us cannot imagine, and hearing is a gift that most of us actually just take for granted. Not knowing that sound of your parents' voice, to cross a road without being able to hear a car engine, or to be unable to partake in normal conversation, means navigating life with a profound and permanent barrier. Yet with the right support and instruction from an early age, the challenges faced by deaf and hearing impaired children need not be insurmountable, and deaf learners may have every opportunity to succeed in education and lead rich and happy lives. Therefore, it is of the utmost importance that we endeavour to ensure that all deaf children are provided with the appropriate professional guidance that they deserve. Simply put, it is a human rights issue, and without guaranteed access to such professional support, it is one which we are failing on. Through ensuring that deaf learners are supported from the earliest stages of their education by qualified professional teachers of the deaf, these children stand the best opportunity to succeed in school, develop the skills and qualifications they need for a fulfilling career, and participate and contribute as equal and valued citizens in wider society. Deafness is not a learning disability, but without the right support in place, deaf children can face massive, unnecessary barriers in their education and in their development. Every child, regardless of their level of deafness, deserves the opportunity to reach their full potential. Yet many deaf children are being left behind due to the shortage of qualified teachers of deaf and specialist staff. This lack of support has a profound and negative impact on their education, communication skills and emotional well-being. We know that early intervention is absolute key. The earlier a deaf child receives support, the better their chances are of success in school and in life. And families too need guidance from the start. Qualified teachers of the deaf play a vital role in not only educating these children but also empowering their families with the tools and confidence that they need to support their child's learning. With more than 90% of deaf children born to hearing parents with no experience of deafness, the experience of raising a deaf child is often upsetting and an isolating experience. The circumstances these families find themselves in routinely leads to a loss in earnings and added expenses as parents take time from their careers and pay for services to support their children's needs. Whilst the National Deaf Children's Society does brilliant work in supporting these families, too often the Department for Education fails to best support these children in their education. Across the UK, there has been an alarming number of specialised teachers leave the profession, and it is evidence that we are not training enough new teachers. Mr Speaker, I am calling today for the Minister of Education to act urgently. We need a comprehensive plan that guarantees every deaf child has access to a qualified teacher of the deaf and a special support staff as early as possible, regardless of the severity of their condition. This is not just about fairness, it's about ensuring that every child has the right to an education that meets their needs. Deputy Speaker, I will be supporting the motion so we can give deaf and hearing impaired children the support they so desperately deserve. Thank you.
Peter Martin.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I would like to welcome this motion from UUP colleagues today, and it's certainly been an interesting debate so far. Currently in Northern Ireland, children should already have access to a teacher of the deaf, and that's been reflected on already, and should also have access to an educational audiologist, regardless of their level of deafness, where they are educated or when that need is actually identified. We know, and the members just highlighted, that deafness is not a learning disability, and that with given the right support and help, children can at least match pace with hearing children, and in many cases actually outperform them. The majority of deaf children are educated at mainstream schools. Yes, yet it is the undisputed case that many deaf children do not achieve the same academic outcomes as hearing peers. And certainly this is something I think all members would like to see improvement in. One of the key interventions that ensures that deaf children can succeed is obviously that they're taught by very skilled teachers who can adapt teaching methodologies and materials to accommodate individual strengths and needs. Again, and I've reflected this before in many other speeches, the earlier the intervention, the better the clinical outcomes or educational outcomes in the end. A further aspect that I've noticed when I was preparing this research is that deaf children can achieve better academic results when both teachers and families have high expectations of these children, and this unfortunately is not always the case. Helen Ferguson, who's the head of policy and influencing at the National Deaf Children's Society, said the following: "Deaf children's expectations are being limited unnecessarily. Teachers and parents have a lot of assumptions about what deaf young people can and cannot do. There are deaf doctors, deaf pilots, deaf people working in construction. There are a whole range of jobs open to deaf people. We need to raise expectations and encourage children to follow their passions and not be bound by any assumptions." Northern Ireland actually has certain advantages over the rest of the UK in that it has one single unified sensory service, which is located obviously within EA, but as noted, this level of support and availability sometimes can be quite patchy across the province. I would also like to recognise the excellent work in this field of the National Deaf Children's Society, which has been previously referenced, who support all the deaf children in Northern Ireland and their families every year. There are a number of other local organisations working in this area. I'd like to highlight Action Deaf Youth, who came recently to my son's school to highlight communication methods with deaf or hearing impaired children. And the readout that I got was the session was really good. I would like to thank, in closing, every teacher of the deaf who works here in Northern Ireland with these amazing children and their families. Today, your work has not gone unnoticed, and the impact that you're having on our children's lives is really, really significant. And just in closing, I welcome the chance to speak on this debate, Deputy Speaker, and it would seem that we are wholly united in our support in this chamber for deaf children and their families. Thank you.
Kelly Armstrong.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to absolutely support the motion that's been brought forward by the Ulster Unionists. I'll declare an interest because, as a member of this House who is part of the deaf community, I'm hard of hearing and I'm a double hearing aid wearer. And I'd just like to say to all of those who are watching today, nothing about us without us. Mr. Deputy Speaker, there is an urgent need to increase access to early and effective support for deaf children in Northern Ireland to enable them to achieve their potential. As the Deaf Friendly Schools guidance produced in 2022 confirms, deafness is not a learning disability, as others have said, and given the right support, deaf children can make the same progress as hearing children of similar cognitive ability. However, many deaf children are falling behind their peers and are at high risk of poor mental health. There has never been a more important time to invest in effective and early support to tackle the root cause of disadvantage. Early and effective support to develop language and communication is vital for all deaf children, whether they use spoken language, sign language or both. As others have said, there are around 1,400 children who are deaf in Northern Ireland, with around about 200 of those under the age of 5. And you may know we have one of the best newborn hearing screening programmes in the world and access to state-of-the-art technology, mainly cochlear implants and hearing aids. However, deaf children are not currently achieving the outcomes that we know are possible, and we are not maximising the return on public investment already being made in screening and technology. When deaf children have access to early and effective support, outcomes are transformed, and by improving outcomes we can unlock significant savings not only for education but for our health and social care system and the wider economy, and of course creates a better outcome for deaf and hard of hearing children. Mr. Speaker, for deaf children whose families want them to learn, listen and speak, the benefits of auditory verbal therapy are clear. Approximately 80% of children who attend an auditory verbal therapy programme for at least 2 years achieve the same level of spoken language as their hearing peers. The majority of these children attend mainstream schools and are attaining educational outcomes on par with hearing children. However, at present, there is little to no provision of auditory verbal therapy within the health and social care system and local services in Northern Ireland. But we can change this by training speech and language therapists and teachers of the deaf in this approach. A number of years ago, I had the pleasure of visiting Jordanstown, the Northern Ireland School and Centre for Excellence for Children who are deaf or visually impaired. At that meeting, it was confirmed that specialist training for teachers of the deaf had to be either self-funded by those teachers or paid out of that school's funds. That was a disgrace. And I worked quite hard, and thanks to the Minister of Education at that time, that the issue was resolved and specialist teacher training is now funded. However, they do still have to go across to Liverpool. There isn't any provision here. My concern is, or my hope perhaps is, that when the Sign Language Bill is finally brought forward by communities, it will include legal clarity and requirements in regards to training for teachers of the deaf. It is important there is clarity with respect to the future Sign Language GCSE. Will this be taught by people who are deaf, who have a teaching qualification, or teachers who have to complete a sign language qualification? And if it's the latter, where will this training be held and what will the cost be? Economic analysis has shown that an investment of £80,000 per year for the next 10 years is needed to train the required number of auditory verbal therapists, while supporting some of the most vulnerable children direct as we build the workforce. This will not only transform opportunities and outcomes for deaf children in Northern Ireland, but will also provide a significant economic return, estimated to be in the region of £4.5 million over the next 10 years. By investing in proactive therapy and inclusive teaching, we can ensure families of deaf children are able to access support wherever they live in Northern Ireland, enabling children who are deaf or hard of hearing to have the same opportunities in life as their hearing peers. In conclusion, it would be useful to have clarification from the Minister of Education what input his department has had with regard to the Department for Health's Adult Learning Disability Service model and the Children with Disabilities framework. If Health has established a Children's Services reform process to reform children's services, and that reform process includes children with a disability, how will education be affected by Health's regional position and future commissioning? Thank you.
Danny Donnelly.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I thank the Ulster Unionist members for bringing forward this motion to the Assembly today, and as my party colleagues from Strangford have already outlined, we will be supporting the motion. It's vital that we improve support for deaf children in our education system, and the key to that is training and recruitment of more specialist teachers for the deaf. This motion calls on the Minister for Education to ensure that every deaf child and their family has access to a qualified teacher of the deaf, regardless of other circumstances. As mentioned, there are around 1,400 deaf children in Northern Ireland, and there currently is not the level of support needed for all of them. And as previously mentioned, we are also seeing a concerning decline in the numbers of teachers of the deaf, down 32% since 2011, with another 30% expected to retire in the next decade. This parallels the experience of many other professions we are seeing, particularly in my role as a nurse and a member of the Health Committee, the declining number of people in professions such as general practice. While in many such professions better pay and working conditions are available elsewhere, such as in the Republic of Ireland, an additional challenge for teachers of the deaf is gaining the necessary qualifications. The Sensory Service has also highlighted challenges in providing cover for teachers of the deaf, which impacts on the levels of support for deaf children and young people. The Jordanstown School, as mentioned by my colleague Kelly Armstrong, resides in East Antrim and certainly is very well respected in the area for providing this level of service to children and their families. There are many logistical challenges for the recruitment and training of teachers of the deaf, many of whom work there. Northern Ireland does not have the capacity for local training, requiring trainees to travel, which incurs significant costs and can be difficult for trainees with personal or family connections locally. Though the Sensory Service does help with costs, which can be very beneficial, these other challenges persist. Another problem is that career pathways are not always clear to the trainees or their teachers who wish to become teachers of the deaf, creating a barrier to further recruitment. The Department of Education should play a role in encouraging and facilitating these pathways and to consider commissioning local training here in Northern Ireland, and maybe that's something the Minister will speak to. As an Alliance Party Health spokesperson, I think it's important to discuss the importance of teachers of the deaf to our health and social care service, especially as they work in a range of health and social care professionals. As previously mentioned, in Northern Ireland, deaf children are more likely to suffer from anxiety and other psychological disorders, which comes from lack of awareness from the wider community, barriers to communication and social isolation that come with such barriers. On a previous debate on the 20th of February this year, one of the first such debates in this Assembly mandate, I spoke about the vital role of our speech and language therapists, and since then I've been questioning the Department of Health on the need to improve training and provide more training places for speech and language therapists in our local universities. More broadly, we need a collaborative approach between the Departments of Education and Health to address the wider challenges that require a response from both, as opposed to working separately on this. The absence of specialist support for deaf children reflects a failure of successive assemblies to update vital equality legislation. Scotland has recently legislated to incorporate the United Nations Conventions on the Rights of the Child, the UNCRC, into their domestic law. Article 23 of which states that children with any disability should enjoy a full and decent life, and their right to special care appropriate to their condition and the circumstances of their parents or carers. This should be a requirement of both the Department of Education and indeed the whole Executive Department and all public authorities in Northern Ireland. We should also recognise the importance of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the UNCRPD, which I plan to address through a private member's bill. Such actions would seek to reduce the unacceptable gap in equality legislation and the impact this has been having on deaf and disabled people in Northern Ireland. To conclude, Mr Deputy Speaker, we must ensure that all children are supported to reach their full potential, and this should not be subject to any limitations. Therefore, support for deaf children is extremely important, and I encourage the Minister to do what he can to ensure that all deaf children have access to qualified teachers of the deaf, and this is a vital part of their educational development into wider health and well-being. Thank you.
I call Timothy Gaston.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker. Like others, I welcome this motion and the opportunity to highlight the challenges faced by deaf children and their families. While preparing for this debate, I read the Deaf-Friendly School Guidance produced by the Department of Education. In that guidance, it is noted that deafness is not a learning disability, and given the right support, deaf children can make the same progress as hearing children of similar cognitive ability. I believe that Northern Ireland is failing to give those children the right support, and I want to highlight 3 reasons why I say that. The first is the fact that it is often the school which identifies that a pupil may have a hearing problem. If a child is slow to respond when called at home or doesn't carry out the instruction, that can often be associated to disobedience, or if the parent is more charitable, is associated with selective hearing. It is often only when that child gets into a school environment that the teacher, who obviously has more experience dealing with children with a wide range of abilities and challenges, will say to the parent that they should consider getting the child's hearing checked. So while there have been contributions today which have focused on the role of specialist teachers for deaf children, we should not forget the vital role which teachers with no such training play in identifying such issues. That said, even when a teacher has highlighted a possible problem, the issue is often an inordinate delay in the pupil getting an appointment within the health service. And particularly when it comes to those crucial early years in school, such a delay can have profoundly negative consequences for the child. Those challenges were exacerbated during COVID. I know of one parent who has described to me the extremely frustrating experience of attempting to attend speech therapy appointments over Zoom. At the best of times, it can be challenging to hear someone on the other end of the line. Imagine how much more difficult that was when speech therapists were trying to pick up the subtle nuances in speech which indicated a problem. And I would remind the House that obviously speech and hearing issues often go hand in hand. In the case I was advised over the weekend, the child has since been issued with a hearing aid, but the child isn't in P1 or even in P2, but P5. And that hearing issue is a continuing factor to the literacy issues that child is now struggling. Secondly, I want to highlight how Northern Ireland is feeling behind the rest of the UK. In advance of this debate, all members will have received a copy of the Coalition of Deafness Northern Ireland Manifesto. In it, they spell out as a basic demand that all deaf-blind children should have the same educational support as those in England and Wales. Example, children should be supported from diagnosis by a teacher with an appropriate qualification in multisensory impairment. Perhaps the Minister in his response could spell out what he is doing to get us to that point. And finally, while he is responding to that point, can he also take the opportunity to explain why the support offered by this executive when it comes to childcare is 32 million less than the money provided by Westminster? This executive got 57.2 million in burnout consequentials because of a scheme introduced in Great Britain, and yet this four-party executive, of which he is part, only allocated 25 million to childcare. Where, Minister, did that money go? Did it stay within your department, or did it go elsewhere to the other challenges in other executive ministers' budgets?
Thank you. And I now call the Minister of Education. Minister, you have up to 15 minutes.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the members for bringing attention to this important issue, in particular to Mr Robbie Butler for bringing the motion forward today, and just give my appreciation not just for that but also for his time on the Education Committee, and the value and expertise that he brought to that role was very much, I know, appreciated by me, and I wish him well in his new role. I'm sure our farmers will be well served by him in the Committee for DERA, as well as all of the environmental issues which are absolutely important in that particular role. Let me begin just in responding to this motion by first paying credit to the staff in Jordanstown School, Craigie Primary School, Integrated College Glengormley, and the Education Authority's Sensory Service, who do a wonderful job in providing specialist support to deaf children and young people. I also wish to extend my appreciation to staff in our mainstream schools, which is attended by around 77% of our deaf school-age population. My vision for all children, as members know, is that they're happy, learning and succeeding. This must apply to children with hearing loss. Currently there are at least 1,428 deaf children in Northern Ireland, and they are supported by a range of professionals across education and health services. The Education Authority's Sensory Service was established as a regional service in 2018, and it employs teachers of the deaf children and young people, as well as education audiologists, both of whom are at the forefront of early intervention and play a key role in ensuring that deaf children achieve good language and communication skills, make good progress in school and make a successful transition into adulthood. I agree with the motion in that every deaf child and their family should have access to a qualified teacher of the deaf children and young people as early as possible, and I'm pleased to confirm that this is already the case in Northern Ireland. Indeed, were there to be a lack of specialist teachers of deaf children and young people, I agree it would have a negative impact on deaf children and their families. So it is of some comfort that every child does have access equal to or better than nationally used standards throughout the United Kingdom. The Consortium for Research into Deaf Education, the Northern Ireland Report of 2023, otherwise known as the CRIDE Report, provides theoretical average caseloads, and I am pleased to say that the Northern Ireland's peripatetic teachers of deaf children and young people, they would have the smallest number of caseloads within the four nations. I know, members, that there are still challenges in respect of this issue, but there are challenges across the UK, and whilst in Northern Ireland we want to do more, and it's not of much comfort to those who want us to do more, we are in a better position than other parts of the UK in respect of this issue. In Northern Ireland, teachers of deaf children and young people have that caseload of around 59. In comparison, in Scotland the figure is 118, in Wales it's 230, and in England it's 332. Deputy Speaker, I can also confirm that every deaf child has access to an education audiologist, uniquely qualified and skilled to improve access to learning for deaf children through their acoustic evaluations and advice on acoustic enhancements of the school environment. The Sensory Service works in partnership with parents of deaf children and young people to help them support their child's development. And the service provides support to deaf children and their families from the point of identification in the home and later on in the classroom. This motion calls for early access, and again I can inform the House that teachers of deaf children and young people, they do work with newborn babies and their families. The newborn hearing screening programme within the Health and Social Care Trusts refers babies to the service, which aims to respond within 2 days as recommended in the National Sensory Impairment Partnership, or NATSIP, quality standards for sensory services. This partnership, working with health professionals, ensures that families have access to this support at the very earliest opportunity. From referral to first contact for deaf or hard of hearing babies, the service works to impressive deadlines within 2 days for a preschool child and 5 days for school-aged children. The target time frame for the first visit from a teacher of deaf children and young people is 4 weeks, which ensures access to that very early intervention. The commencement of support is of course family-led, and so achieving the target time frame may be impacted by family readiness to engage with support. That said, contact from the service is always maintained throughout the process. The support needs of young deaf children are assessed using the NATSIP Early Years Eligibility Framework. Information from health audiology and ear, nose and throat services and the views and needs of parents and carers are all considered. This framework provides the service with a nationally used guide for levels of support and intervention, ranging from annual intervention right up to several interventions per week, dependent on the individual needs of the child. Service staff use their professional judgment then to apply flexibility depending on the needs of the child. Sensory service staff work in partnership with parents to support children and families, focusing on the child's development in language, communication, literacy and mathematics, as well as social and emotional development and fostering independence. They also provide information and advice to education settings on the implications of deafness and, of course, strategies to promote access to the curriculum and inclusion, including bespoke training for staff. The specialist support we are discussing today is carried out by specialist staff in schools and by sensory service staff who deliver individually tailored intensive supports and outreach for deaf children throughout Northern Ireland from birth and throughout their education. This is an essential aspect of service, and it ensures a child-centred approach, which I am sure, Mr Deputy Speaker, the members will agree is of utmost importance. I note the reference to specialist support professionals, and I feel it is essential that our trained professionals remain highly skilled throughout their careers so that they can provide the best support possible to our children. The sensory service provides professional development for teachers of deaf children and young people so that they can enhance outcomes for deaf children and young people. In line with inclusive practices, around 77% of school-aged deaf children are educated in mainstream schools. And again, I would like to emphasise the importance of the need for specialist staff, as mentioned in this motion. Where a classroom assistant is required to support a deaf child using sign language, the sensory service advises that those assistants should have at least level 3 in British Sign Language. Now, whilst I am proud to speak today about the excellent support we have for deaf children in Northern Ireland, there's always room for improvement. One of the areas for focus identified through the end-to-end review of special educational needs is on ensuring sustainability of the sensory service, which will require workforce planning to address the ageing profiles of teachers of deaf children and young people, and consideration of the need for those specialist teaching assistants. Members may be aware that the National Deaf Children's Society has recently commissioned independent research to review the support for deaf children and young people in Northern Ireland, and I look forward to receiving that report in the coming months, which will no doubt be helpful in informing how we can improve on educational support for deaf children. Once again, can I thank members for highlighting the needs of deaf children, and I trust that it's now clear that every deaf child and their family does have access to a qualified teacher of deaf children and young people and other specialist support staff as early as possible. Some members highlighted just a couple of issues that hopefully I can touch upon. I know Kelly Armstrong spoke of the need for working with the Department of Health in terms of the adult learning disability services, and that's certainly something that I'll follow up on with my department. There'll be no resistance on my part for making sure that my officials engage in that area, and we will do that. Also, the EA Sensory Service, they do engage with the auditory Verbal UK to consider what improvements can be made to services in this area. So that's an area of work that we are continuing to look at. In terms of qualifications, I know Mr Matheson referred to the qualification to become a teacher of the deaf not being available in Northern Ireland, and whilst yes, he is right, the course is available as a distance learning course, but I hear the point that the member's making in respect of having a Northern Ireland course in respect of that. So can I thank Mr Deputy Speaker, members for speaking on this issue. It's one that rightly we need to give attention to, and again we'll continue to pursue these issues in due course. Thank you.
Minister, and thank you for that response. Members, the question is that the motion... Sorry, I'm jumping ahead and I've just been corrected. Colin Crawford, I'm going to call you to wind on the motion, and my apologies for that.
Very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. I thought I was getting off lightly, but thank you. Mr Deputy Speaker, can I, at the very outstart of my remarks, put on record my thanks, my party's thanks, and hopefully the thanks of all members, to every single teacher of the deaf, classroom assistant and support staff who work extremely hard on a daily basis to care, support and educate each and every one of our deaf children. So I want to put on record our thanks, and a special thanks to Deirdre Fawn and her team at the National Deaf Children's Society. Mr Deputy Speaker, today we gather to address and speak on an issue that affects not only the future of our children, but the very fabric of our society. The critical lack of specialist teachers for the deaf and insufficient specialist educational support for learners with disabilities across Northern Ireland. In a world that increasingly celebrates diversity, equality and inclusion, it's disheartening to acknowledge that many
of our children who are deaf or hard of hearing still face significant barriers to access quality education. Our educational system, ideally designed to uplift and empower all students, has left behind a substantial segment of the deaf community. Specialist teachers do not just facilitate learning, they cultivate an environment where students can thrive, build confidence and develop essential life skills. They are the advocates who understand the nuances of sign language, auditory processing and inclusive teaching strategies. Without them, we are not just denying children in education, we're denying them the opportunity to realise their potential and contribute meaningfully to society. Furthermore, it is essential to recognise that the need for specialised educational support does not end with teachers. Schools must provide adequate resources such as assistive technologies, interpreters and tailored curricula to create an inclusive environment where deaf students can flourish alongside their hearing peers. Unfortunately, funding shortages and the lack of awareness often hinder this progress, leaving many students struggling in silence. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the responsibility lies with each of us. Educators, policymakers, community leaders and advocates to act decisively. We must increase our commitment to training and retaining specialist educators in our schools. This includes investing in targeted professional development opportunities and community awareness campaigns that emphasise the importance of deaf education. We must also work tirelessly to allocate appropriate funding to ensure that schools have the tools and resources necessary to support all learners. And Mr. Speaker, Deputy Speaker, just to touch on some other members' remarks, Danny Becker started off by discussing the early intervention and the right to support, and stressed the importance for an education system for all. And I think, Danny, that's something we can all aim and strive towards. David Brooks of the DUP gave the stat of 1,400 deaf children or young people in Northern Ireland, and something I will join David in admitting to is I'm not an expert, David, but I join with you in the opportunity and the challenge to engage on the Education Committee and in this House and in this Chamber to improving services for everyone. Nick Matheson wanted to put on record his thanks to Lee Century Services, but also stressed the service is experiencing pressures, and Nick, that's something that I think we agree on too. He also spoke on the decline in the workforce and the frustration at the need to travel for qualifications in the area. Peter Martin, one of the things I loved about what you said is you spoke about the teachers and families' expectations of what deaf children can and cannot do, and I think that gave it as a challenge not only to teachers but to us all on how we look and how we expect and treat these deaf young people, and it really challenged me on how I look and feel at people. So, in closing, Mr. Deputy Speaker, let us reflect on our shared responsibility to advocate for the rights and needs of every child. As already has been said, we cannot be complacent. Each one of us has a role to play in shaping a more inclusive education system, one where every child, regardless of their hearing ability, has the opportunity to learn, grow and succeed. Let us stand together united in our commitment to championing the needs of deaf children and ensuring that no child is left behind. Together we can build a brighter future, one that truly reflects the diversity and potential of our system. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. We now move to the motion standing order paper. Be agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary if any, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. I have received